I've got to do my warm up. So just a little bit of kind of moving, preparing, and just getting us started. So right, okay, we're good. I think we're good to go. Are you ready?
Yep.
I'm ready. Let's get this show on the road. Who is James Tomblin is a question I've been hearing quite a lot of recently, and I thought it was about time we found out. Hey everyone, I'm Frank from the City of Games. I am the designer and publisher of the City of Kings, Verdoran Gardens, and the Isle of Cats. And a few years ago, I launched my very first game on Kickstarter. Being a self-found designer, publisher is a lot harder than some people might think. And I really want to kind of introduce you to James, someone who I met a few years ago, and just to get you to hear a little bit from him. So James, thanks for joining me. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Frank.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I mean, people don't know this, but you and me, obviously, we chat a lot. We kind of go back and forwards quite a bit. So it's quite funny doing a video with you, I think.
Some would say we're best friends.
Some would say, I'm not sure, but at least one person might say that. So, James, just tell us who you are. Just tell us a little bit about you. Where did you come from? You know, where is the life of James starting out?
Well, I was born on the Isle of Wight in England, and I moved to Bristol when I was 13. And I have been living in Bristol since then, being a design engineer, working for Airbus. I've started and own my own contracting business, which basically provides design and mechanical engineering services to people like Airbus, Augusta-Westland, and various other aeronautical companies.
And that's aeroplanes, right? As opposed to other kind of stuff.
Yeah, so the airplanes, I've done some helicopters. I also worked on the fastest car, which was the Bloodhound, which is launching sometime soon. But yeah, so we've done loads of design pieces, delivering quality goods and quality items to these people and these companies all around the world, and shipped and manufactured all around the world. So yeah, it's been a pretty great career. So I started making some board games about 5 years ago, which is led me to be here today.
So basically what you're saying is if I or anyone else is ever on an aeroplane and something goes wrong, then if we survive, you're the person we should ring up and blame.
Yes.
Great. That's good to know. I've wanted that number for a while. Someone who's afraid of flying, that's great to hear.
It depends which aircraft, but yes.
No, I think you'll do. I'll put his number in the comments below for anyone interested. So moving on from kind of like your career and stuff, obviously I assume you're into board games. So like, when did you first start playing board games? Is this a recent thing, or have you been doing this for a long time? I mean, how old are you, James? I don't know. When did you start this out?
Well, I'm 33.
Uh-huh.
So I'm pretty old. But yeah, I mean, I've always played games. Like, me and my friends when we were younger, we played Monopoly and Risk and various other classic games like this. And also when I was much younger, I got into Warhammer as well, which was something that I was quite keen on. I like the sci-fi element of that. And I got into painting those as well when I was younger. But board games for me, like the modern board games that we all play today, is something that I started doing about 6-7 years ago.
Okay.
I remember sitting around with my friends, and one of my buddies was saying to me that he had this game that was like nothing he'd ever played before, and we have to play it, and it was Eclipse.
Ah, yes.
And I remember sitting around playing it, and I just was absolutely amazed that this kind of experience could be possible from a board game, having only ever really experienced the Monopoly side of things before.
It's funny because Eclipse is one of my favorite games too, which is just, I think coincidentally, but possibly how we kind of got to chatting in the first place a few years ago. And
yeah,
it was such a revolutionary thing, wasn't it, back then, for if you hadn't seen a lot of these other games. So,
oh yeah.
I mean, is Eclipse a game you still play now? I presume that it is.
Yeah, I mean, it is still one of my favorite games.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I did accidentally miss the new Kickstarter for the Second Dawn version of it, but I've got the first edition on my shelf, which I still regularly play. But I know you got the Second Dawn, didn't you? Yes. I think.
So once the lockdown's over, perhaps we'll get a chance to play that.
That's right.
So, I mean, you say this is one of your favorite games, and you've obviously mentioned Warhammer and stuff like. So what are your favorite games now? Have you got like a top three, or what games do you generally enjoy playing?
Yeah, so as I said, like Eclipse is
Mhm.
definitely in my top three. And then I would say Battlestar Galactica. I love the deception
Okay.
part of Battlestar Galactica. We always have a running joke in my friends about one of us being a Cylon. And I always get put in the brig quite a lot. But yeah, I mean, and Nemesis recently is probably getting up to in my top three.
Oh,
I
cool.
really enjoy that sci-fi alien kind of feel to that game.
I've not had a chance to play Nemesis yet, but
I
it
do have it.
sounds like you're a big fan of sci-fi games, because obviously with Eclipse, Battlestar Galactica, and Nemesis, they all have a shared thing in common. Like, do you play non-sci-fi games, or is it just the sci-fi for James?
No, I mean, I obviously play City of Kings, and
You
I
may
like
have play tested that one a couple of times
I've
back in
done
the
quite a lot
day.
of play testing on City of Kings, and that was a lot of fun. And you know, I've played quite a lot of games. I've got like tile laying games like Subterra. I've got let's think what we got. We got the Mage Knight on my shelf, and I mean I've got like over there I've got on my shelf I've got about 60, 70 games that I just
Okay.
yeah, it's not as much as you've got, Frank, but
Well, you know, we can't all fit a house with board games. Some of us have, you know, you've got gym equipment to fit in there.
Well,
I just have donuts and games, so we're all good.
that's true.
So, I mean, let's jump into Defection just a little bit. So, let's talk about how long have you been working on Defection? You know, when did Defection first start being a thing for you?
So I started working on Defection, the game side of Defection, about 5 years ago.
Okay.
And it all stemmed from having experienced these games such as like Eclipse and things, and starting to think like I really love like the idea of exploring space and building your little board in front of you and managing your game. And I had this idea for a story way before I started working on the game, which was this whole backstory for this world, which became the world that is in and underneath Defection.
Oh, okay.
And the world of Kelressa and the 4 factions that are on the planet, and the whole history and lore behind them. Like each of those factions have their own unique history and backstory, and all the characters have their own. It's not as evident in the game as it needs, because it's not an important part of your experience in the game. It's nice to have that backstory, but it doesn't drive your decisions in the game. But it's all there, and it's something that I had in the back of my head. I've even written a film script for me and my friend wrote basically scripted out this whole film script for Defection.
So for you, Defection isn't just a game. It's a whole universe. There's stories and narratives around this, and the game is just is one of the outlets, or would you say it's like the primary outlet for the story, or like where does it kind of sit within that?
So if we go into the future, there's going to be a blockbuster movie at some point, I imagine.
Of course.
Which may be my biggest earner. But there is a comic book currently in the world and out there. It's something that I decided to do about 3 years ago. I think it was 2017. I launched that on Kickstarter. It was kind of my way of like testing the Kickstarter platform and seeing how the back end of the Kickstarter and how it works as a creator, and how you can kind of offer the fulfillment and the logistics of that kind of a project.
Yeah.
So that's my main reason for doing it. But I also wanted to tell a bit of the story of Defection before I went into the board game, and launched that on Kickstarter. Obviously, in 2017, the game was in full development by that point, and we had a very solid game at that point. It still needed a lot more development, which is why it's taken me another 2 years to get it to where it is today. But yeah, so the comic book is there. The film script, I need to finish it properly, but one day it'll be there. And now, yeah, the board game. I mean, as I said, I had this whole story in this world. Kelressa was having this horrible war take place, and you'd wanted to defect from this battle. You're sick of fighting for no point and for the government's causes. So you end up defecting from the war and loading up these poor civilians that have been trapped in this conflict, and shooting off out into space and finding new homes for them on these colony planets. And that was the story of Defection. And if you've looked at anything about Defection so far, you'll start to understand why the pick up and deliver mechanism kind of suits that kind of idea of picking up civilians and taking them here, and the conflict involved in space and the exploration of space and your player interaction. So that's kind of something in my head where I thought, okay, well, I've got this excellent story, and then there's these cool mechanics, and I've been playing a few games like Firefly, and like Zia and things like that, where you were going around being this space pilot in space and exploring and sort of creating your own journey. And I thought, well, hang on a minute, I've got something where this story is really deep and interesting that would really suit some of these mechanics. And I felt like I could add a very different experience to this with this story, and also with the fact that I really wanted players to be very interactive with each other, and each player's decision as to what they do and how they play the game directly impacts what other players might do and the decisions that they're going to make. So that was like kind of where, this is going back 5 years. This is kind of where my head was at, and I just delved into it. I cut up some card and played with my girlfriend at the time and my family, and then started going to gaming groups and bringing it there, and just meeting new people around Bristol and taking it to conventions. It's one of the
things, which really, when we first met, because I remember we met at Aircon probably 3 years ago now or so, and I always remember that you often go to conventions, you see people playing games, you see people demoing games, designers of all sorts. And for you, one of the reasons you kind of stood out to me was the fact that there you were, a 30-year-old guy, and you're there with a 50-year-old, 60-year-old guy. I don't know how old your father is, but your assistant on your booth was your dad.
Yeah.
And, for me, that was such an amazing kind of thing, because we all get volunteers. We all get people to come and help us and do stuff. I work with my loving partner, Sarah, who we spend a lot of time doing this. But for me, the fact that you had your dad involved in this, and your dad was there, and your dad was at a convention for a whole weekend helping you set up and working with you on the booth and knew some about the game and stuff was such a cool kind of story. Like, I found that really remarkable that you'll have a family connection to this, as well as your personal side and professional side, which was something that kind of really stood out to me.
Yeah, I mean, my dad's amazing. My mum and dad have been awesome with this. Like, they're always there for me with almost everything I do. It's been they've been very supportive parents from the word go. But like, yeah, it was quite funny, because at the time I had a friend who was going to come up with me and help me on my stand, and it turned out that he couldn't make it. He had an illness that meant that he couldn't make it. So I was scrambling around last minute, and I was like, oh my god, I can't go up to it's a 4-hour
worst case scenario, right?
Yeah, it's like the first convention I'd ever been to. It was Aircon 2017, and is it 2017? I think it was, wasn't it?
I think it was.
Yeah, and I had never really taken the game to a show before, and when you do that kind of thing, you're exposing your soul to the world, aren't you? It's something that you've created internally, and you've put it on the table, and you're saying, here, everyone, have a look, see what you think. So it's like, I was very nervous about doing that. And I had last minute nobody to go with me and support me with it. And I would have had to have built the stand all by myself and try and maintain the stand whilst being able to eat and drink. Yeah. So I was a bit nervous.
I know the feeling well.
Yeah. And my dad just stepped in. He cancelled all of his plans and just stepped in. So it was like, yeah, he's been great. But since then, like at recent conventions, I've had my good friends, Pete and Kyle, support me on the stands, who always seem to get along with the crowd very well. And so it's been good. The conventions have been good. And I remember the funny thing about meeting you, Frank, was we were actually chatting on Twitter before, and we arranged to meet up at Aircon, which is a 4-hour drive away from Bristol.
Miles and miles away from our house, right?
Exactly. And then when we got there and we met up, I was like, well, where are you from, Frank? And you said Bristol. And I was like,
literally round the corner from each other. It's like a 15-minute walk, and yet we waited 6 months and hundreds of miles before we first met.
It's pretty funny.
But I want to touch on a couple of things you said. So firstly, the fact you talked about your other Kickstarter for the comic is fantastic, because one of the things people are always concerned about with Kickstarters is whether this person's going to be able to deliver it, whether they've arranged the manufacturing and logistics and they know the other side, or whether they're just a game designer. So for you to have already produced a physical product, okay, it hasn't got the complexities of a board game, but it's still a physical thing that has to be manufactured, it has to be shipped all around the world and so on. It is great to see. The other thing which I love is the fact that you were talking about how the game was inspired by the story, right? You had Kelleressa with this war, everyone's being killed and it's being destroyed, and how this inspiration for kind of taking the pick up and deliver mechanic of rescuing those civilians, but the game not just being that, but that kind of inspiration, I think, is a really cool thing. And I think that this is one of the things that, are kind of moving forward that I really like about you and your kind of way of working. You've been working on this game for 5 years. I met you 3 years ago. And since then, I've seen the game iterate so much. I mean, I've probably play tested the game myself 100 times or more. I hate to think, but outside of my own games, it's definitely a game that I've played huge amounts of times. And I really admire the fact that you listen to feedback and you've gone to other designers, not just myself, but other people, and you've really gone out there to try and get this game refined. So kind of just to wrap this up a little bit, do you want to just talk about, a little bit of the play testing, the kind of the process you've been through, like how many people you've tested the game with, like how long you've been doing that, how much the game has changed? Because we've talked about your friends and family, but I know, like myself, that there are many other people out there who have play tested Defection over the years.
Yeah, so we've had hundreds and hundreds of people at the table playing Defection over the years. It's been very important to me, like you say, like to get people's opinions, to get people's feedback, to see different people play the game, and what they do and what bits they enjoyed. I remember Aircon was a pretty fantastic experience for me. I'd already play tested the game with my, obviously, as I said, family and friends, and I had also gone to like local game groups. I'd utilized our local game cafe, Chance Encounters, which is a great little shop. And they have playtest nights every Monday night, so I've been taking it there and having different people play it. And
you worked at Chance Encounters for a little while as well, didn't you? Kind of on the side, and I think just because of how much you enjoyed board games, like there you are designing airplanes, and then you're also like just doing teaching in a board game cafe as well.
Well, that's it.
Sorry, go on.
Interesting enough is I actually stopped designing aircraft for a year to do this board game. And that was in 2017, which is I took a year off to try and really go full head into like developing the game, and then obviously the costs of artwork and everything, and the cost of production and getting the prototypes required me to go back to earn enough money to be able to fund the rest of the development of the game. But yeah, I worked in that cafe whilst I was off, which was great, and continued to when I went back to engineering and I was employed there as a games guru. So I was teaching board games to people in the cafe, and that was my only job in that. I had to serve drinks as well, but my main job there was to advise on what games would be good to play and to teach them how to play it very quickly, because obviously I can't, when someone picks up a game of Mage Knight, I'm not going to sit there and teach them at a cafe when they've only got 4 hours. But yeah, so we utilized.
So you did the play testing there, and then you went on and I assume did it at other places too?
Yeah, so we then that was where we went to Aircon shortly after that, and that was kind of where I was opened up into like using the convention scene to playtest on top of my own playtesting schedule. So we had all these playtests with game groups and everything in Bristol and around the UK, and the main thing we used on top of that was a lot of people go to the trade shows and demo their games and say this is the new game that's coming. I decided that what I wanted to do was go there and say, here is a prototype of what we want to make. Come and tell us what you think, play it, and give us your feedback. And we put a lot of surveys out after the conventions, after we had, even at a convention, you'd get hundreds of people play the game at tables. We'd have a couple of tables running. And we get a ton of valuable anonymous feedback. So one of the things I didn't like about the first, well, not didn't like, but something that you can get naturally from playtesting when I'm there is that people can maybe not be as honest as maybe you want. So they might not want to hurt your feelings and say, oh, I didn't like this, it was rubbish. But when you send out an anonymous survey online, people tend to be a bit more honest because they don't know, I'm not going to know who's saying it. So we got some really great feedback from those conventions, and it was something that a lot of people can get precious about and a bit defensive about. But I am always been of the opinion of take it on board and understand it and fix it.
And I think that's why, wasn't it? Because obviously you worked on a game for a few years up to 2017. Then you started going to these conventions and stuff. And now it's 3 years later that the game's on Kickstarter. And I've been one of these people who's been lucky enough, because we shared an office for a while, to see you kind of to make those decisions where you didn't feel like the game was ready to go on Kickstarter. You know, as many of us do the first time we design a game, you realize that some things were convoluted, some things were maybe bloated, and you've just kept stripping it back and refining it to now. So to finish this up, like, why is the game done now? You know, what's kind of this final point that you've got to that makes you feel like it's ready?
So that's the interesting thing, because I used to get, and some of the guys might be watching this now, but I remember I get emails a lot and messages a lot saying, when's it on Kickstarter? When's it on Kickstarter? When's it on Kickstarter? And every time I respond with, it's coming, it's coming, it's coming. But the reason, I
asked you a few times.
Yeah. But the reason that I never pressed the button previous to now is because the game wasn't ready. I wanted the game to be 100% developed. I wanted the game to be 100% ready. I wanted everything ready. And when I pressed that Kickstarter launch button, for me, that was me saying to myself and everyone that this game is done. Mm-hmm. And when I pressed the launch button, this game was done.
I have a similar attitude to work myself. So it's great to hear that. So for anyone who's, watching this and kind of, I've deliberately kept away the questions of what is Defection? How do you play Defection and so on? Because I really wanted this to be more about just talking about James himself and a little bit of his kind of passion for the industry and the development process he's been through. If you want to learn about the game, then you can go to the Facebook page, the Board Game Geek page, the Kickstarter page, all of which will be linked below in various descriptions and whatnot. If you've got any questions you would like to ask James yourself, then add them to the comments below, and I'm sure I can bully him into making sure that he responds to them all. I've not talked to you about this, James, but I assume you're okay with that. So
yeah, that's fine.
Thank you so much for joining me for this. It's been great. It's been nice to have a recorded conversation with you for once. And I hope you have a fantastic day. And to everyone else, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all again soon.